The history of gold, the metal that outlived the ship that carried it. Nobody drowns quietly with 300 pounds strapped to their waist. And yet, on a September night in 1857, dozens of men did exactly that. Belts stuffed with gold dust cinched so tight around their ribs that when the sea finally took them, it took them straight down. No struggle, no float, just gone. The camera, if there had been one, would not have lingered on their faces. It would have stayed on the belts. Below deck, in the hold of a wooden-hulled steamer somewhere off the coast of the Carolinas, water is already ankle-deep and rising past the crates. A single lantern swings from a beam, throwing long shadows across stacked wooden boxes and iron-strapped kegs, each one marked with a shipping agent's chalk. Inside them, bars, ingots, coins, raw dust panned from a California riverbed months earlier. The wood groans. Somewhere above, a bell is ringing, though no one below can tell if it is warning or prayer. This is the SS Central America, 3 days out of Panama, bound for New York, carrying nearly 600 men, women, and children. And something else. Something that does not breathe, does not scream, does not care whether the ship sinks or sails on. Later, people would simply call her the Ship of Gold. Down in that hold sat somewhere near 30,000 pounds of it, freshly dug from the hills above Sacramento, destined for the vaults of banks that, at that very hour, several hundred miles north, were quietly beginning to fail. How does that much gold end up on a wooden steamer in the teeth of a hurricane nobody predicted? And why did the banks of New York need it so badly that men were willing to strap it to their bodies and sink with it rather than let it go? To understand that, we have to leave the storm for a moment, and go back 3 days, to a dock in Panama where none of this yet looked like a tragedy. 3 days earlier, the port of Aspinwall, known today as Colon, smells of coal smoke, tar, and wet rope. Miners fresh off the Panama Railroad stand in line at a wooden shed, waiting their turn at a brass scale, their pouches of dust weighed ounce by a clerk who does not look up. Some have been in California 2 years. Some have struck nothing and are heading home with borrowed fare. A few carry belts already sewn shut with hundreds of dollars in coin, unwilling to let it out of arm's reach even for the voyage. Records show the SS Central America departed Aspinwall on September 3, 1857, under Captain William Lewis Herndon, a naval officer with a distinguished record of Amazon exploration behind him. She was carrying an estimated 30,000 pounds of gold, some in commercial shipment, insured and manifested, some in the private belts and trunks of ordinary passengers who trusted no bank enough to wire it ahead. Contemporary estimates put the cargo's value at close to $2,1857, a figure that, converted honestly, would be a modest fortune today and was, at the time, enough to matter to an entire financial system. That system was already cracking. In August, weeks before the ship even left Panama, the Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company had collapsed in New York, one thread in a financial panic historians would later name for the year 1857. Banks were calling in loans. Confidence was thinning like ice on a pond in early spring. Somewhere in a ledger book on Wall Street, a banker had already counted on this shipment arriving, on schedule, to steady the reserves. The ship sailed north. The storm was already forming. By September 9th, the sky over the Atlantic had turned the color of a day-old bruise, and the barometer aboard the Central America was falling in a way none of the crew liked to say out loud. What had begun as rough weather off the Bahamas was, by every measure the crew understood, becoming something closer to a hurricane. Not yet named, not yet tracked by anyone on land, simply a wall of wind moving up the coast at the same speed as the ship trying to outrun it. Captain Herndon ordered the sails struck and the engines pushed harder, coal shoveled faster, the ship's iron paddle wheels churning through swells that were beginning to break clean over the rail. Below, in the engine room, a tacking gland around one of the shaft bearings had begun to weep seawater, a slow trickle at first, the kind of leak any ship absorbs without alarm. Nobody thought much of it that first night. The pumps were running. The coal was dry. The gold sat exactly where it had been loaded, indifferent to the weather above it. By the second night, the trickle at the packing gland had become a stream, and the stream had become something the ship's carpenter could not plug with tar and canvas fast enough. The smell below decks changed, coal smoke mixing now with the mineral tang of bilge water rising past the floorboards, a smell passengers would later describe, when they had the words for it, as the smell of a ship beginning to die. The engines, built to move the ship, were now fighting simply to keep her upright, coal and water both draining away. This is the first small crack in a system that had, until now, held. And once a ship's pumps begin to lose the race against incoming water, the question stops being whether she survives the storm and becomes something colder. How long can 600 people keep bailing by hand before their arms simply give out? By the third night, the answer was arriving in real time. With the boilers finally drowned and the engines silent, the Central America was no longer a ship under power. She was a hull at the mercy of open ocean, wallowing broadside into 40-foot swells with nothing left to steer her. Captain Herndon organized what stands as one of the more remarkable scenes recorded in 19th century maritime disaster accounts. Nearly the entire adult male population aboard, passengers and crew alike, formed a human chain from the flooding hold to the deck, passing buckets hand to hand through the night, hour after hour, with no machinery left to help them. Almost 600 souls were aboard that ship, men who had struck it rich in California, women traveling to join husbands back east, a scattering of children below decks trying to sleep through a nightmare their parents could not explain to them. Somewhere in the same flooded hold the men were bailing from sat the crates of gold, immovable, heavy, useless for the one task that mattered now, which was staying afloat. There is a strange, quiet detail in the accounts that follow. Some of the trunks belonging to wealthier passengers were so packed with gold coin that sailors trying to clear the hold for bailing simply could not lift them. The very cargo everyone aboard had risked 2 years of their life to earn was now, in the most literal sense, dead weight, heavier than any man, indifferent to the difference between a ship that floats and one that doesn't. And still the water rose. What happens, then, when 600 exhausted arms finally cannot bail fast enough against an ocean that does not tire? On the morning of September 12, 1857, with the storm still raging and the ship listing so badly that walking her decks required holding a rail with both hands, Captain Herndon made the decision every captain dreads. Boats were lowered, not enough of them, never enough of them, and women and children were passed down into the arms of sailors on a smaller ship, the brig marine, that had come alongside through sheer chance and seamanship. Neither vessel's crew would ever fully explain. It was, by any account, one of the few pieces of mercy that long night offered. The men who remained aboard the Central America knew, by early afternoon, that the ship would not last. Survivors would later recall Captain Herndon standing near the wheelhouse in full uniform as the ship's stern began to settle, giving orders in a voice that did not waver even as the deck beneath him did. Legend has it he was seen reading from a prayer book in the last minutes before the ship broke apart. A detail some survivors swore to and others never mentioned. The kind of thing history cannot fully confirm, but has never quite let go of either. At around 8 o'clock that evening, the SS Central America split and went downstream, first into the Atlantic, roughly 200 miles off the coast of the Carolinas. Records show that of the nearly 600 aboard, about 425 did not survive the night, pulled under by the suction of the sinking hull, or by the gold belt they would not, even then, let go of. The camera, again, does not linger on the faces. It follows the crates, the kegs, the strong boxes, tumbling loose from the breaking hull, sinking not fathoms but nearly a mile and a half straight down into water so deep and so dark it swallowed both light and sound the moment they crossed the surface. Here is where the story most people are told simply ends. A tragedy at sea, a fortune lost, a captain who went down with his ship. But that is not where the gold story ends. It is where it quietly turns into something else entirely. Because the loss of that shipment did not stay buried at the bottom of the Atlantic. Word reached New York within days, and the banks that had been counting on those 30,000 pounds of gold to steady their reserves now had nothing to steady them with. The Panic of 1857, already underway before the ship even sank, deepened sharply in the weeks that followed. Banks failed, credit froze, businesses collapsed across the country, and historians still debate exactly how much of that panic can be laid at the feet of one missing shipment. But the timing, recorded in bank ledgers and newspaper columns of the day, is not in dispute. A storm 200 miles offshore had reached directly into the vaults of Wall Street. And here is the second quieter turn. The one that changes how you should picture that gold sitting in the dark for the next 131 years. Unlike the ship's oak hull, unlike the iron fittings, unlike the bones of the men who went down holding it, gold does not rust. It does not tarnish, does not oxidize, does not react with seawater or salt or time in any meaningful way at all. It is, chemically, one of the most stubbornly unreactive elements on the periodic table, atomic number 79, a metal so inert that objects made of it can sit at the bottom of an ocean for over a century and come back up looking, by every account of the divers who found them, almost exactly as they looked the day they were minted, according to most divers and conservators who examined them. Think about what that means for the story you've just been told. The very weight that helped drown a ship, the crates too heavy for exhausted men to lift out of a flooding hold, sat afterward on the ocean floor completely unbothered by everything that had destroyed the vessel around it. The wood rotted, the iron corroded into lace-like ruin. The gold simply waited, indifferent, unmarked, exactly as valuable and exactly as untouched as the day it left California. It had not caused the tragedy out of malice, and it would not preserve itself out of mercy. It simply did what gold does. Nothing at all, while everything around it changed completely. That patience paid off, in the strangest sense, 131 years later. In 1988, a team led by an engineer named Tommy Thompson, working with a group called the Columbus America Discovery Group, located the wreck of the Central America roughly 8,000 feet down, using sonar equipment and a custom-built robotic submersible they nicknamed Nemo. Technology that, in 1857, would have sounded like something out of a novel no one had written yet. What the cameras on that robotic submersible found, sitting on the seafloor in the cold and total dark, was almost impossible to reconcile with a century of decay. Gold bars sat stacked where they had settled, coins scattered across the sediment in loose spans, some still bearing the mint marks of San Francisco pressed into their faces as sharply as the day they were struck. One ingot recovered from the site weighed close to 80 pounds, an object so dense that lifting it required two men working together, later nicknamed among the recovery team the Eureka Bar, a nod to the very gold fields it had come from. The recovery was not simple, and it was not quiet. Insurance companies that had paid claims on the original 1857 loss argued for a share of anything brought up more than a century later, and the legal battles that followed stretched through the 1990s in federal courts, a modern argument over ownership of gold that had outlasted the empire of trust it was originally meant to serve. Historians and appraisers still debate the total value of everything eventually recovered. Figures cited over the years have ranged well past $100 million, a number driven not just by the weight of the metal, but by the rarity and history stamped into every coin. The gold itself, of course, was unmoved by any of it. The arguments in courtrooms, the auctions, the collectors who would later pay extraordinary premiums for coins that had sat at the bottom of the sea. That indifference is, in a strange way, the entire history of gold in miniature. Long before the Central America, long before California, long before any bank ever existed to panic over a missing shipment, humans had already decided that this particular metal, inert, unreactive, stubbornly unchanging, deserved to mean something enormous. Archaeologists working at Varna, in modern-day Bulgaria, uncovered a burial site containing gold ornaments dated to roughly 4,600 BCE, among the oldest confirmed gold artifacts in the world, proof that long before writing, before bronze, before the wheel in many parts of the world, someone had already decided this yellow metal deserved to be buried with the dead as a mark of status. In ancient Egypt, temple texts described gold as the flesh of the gods. Legend has it, a substance believed to be literally divine rather than merely valuable, a belief that shaped how pharaohs were buried and how tombs were built for thousands of years afterward. That same stubborn unreactivity that let gold outlast a shipwreck also let it become the backbone of modern global finance. In 1944, delegates meeting at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, agreed to tie the US dollar to gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce, with other currencies pegged to the dollar in turn, a system meant to stabilize a world just emerging from war. It held for nearly 3 decades, until August 15, 1971, when President Richard Nixon ended that convertibility outright, severing the direct link between the dollar and gold that had shaped international trade since the end of the Second World War. And yet gold never actually left the vaults. The United States Bullion Depository at Fort Knox, opened in 1937, still holds a substantial share of the nation's reserves behind granite walls and blast doors, guarded not because gold does anything, but because of what people have agreed, for nearly 7,000 years, to believe it means. Central banks around the world still hold it today, not for its usefulness in any factory or field, but for the same reason a Bulgarian mourner buried it with the dead nearly 7,000 years ago. Because it does not decay, and in a world where almost everything else eventually does, that alone made it worth more than almost anything else humans could dig out of the ground. This is, in a quiet way, still true in your own life, whether or not you have ever thought about it. The wedding ring on a hand near you, the gold plating inside the phone in your pocket, the small reserve tucked into your country's central bank vault. All of it rests on the same stubborn chemistry that let bars sit untouched on the Atlantic floor for 131 years. We build entire systems of trust, currencies, marriages, inheritances around a metal whose only real promise is that it will not change. Everything else around it, ships, banks, empires, people, does. So what stays with you, out of all of this, is probably not any single date or number. It's the image of exhausted men bailing water by hand through the night, unable to lift the very cargo they'd crossed an ocean twice to earn. It's a captain standing steady at the wheel of a ship he knew would not survive the evening. And it's the strange, almost eerie stillness of gold bars sitting untouched on the ocean floor for over a century, patient in a way nothing organic ever manages to be. Gold remembers nothing. That is exactly why we trust it with everything. So here is the question worth sitting with tonight. If the one thing we have always valued most about gold is that it never changes, what does that say about everything else we've built around it? The banks, the currencies, the promises, all of them fragile, all of them capable of failing in a single stormy week the way New York's did in 1857? And would you have cut the belt loose or held on until the very end? Main sources for this story include Gary Kinder's Ship of Gold in the Deep Blue Sea, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's historical records on the SS Central America, and archival newspaper coverage of the Panic of 1857. The full list is in the description.